afternoon. Happy Hanukkah. It's Thursday, the 18th of December. I'm Laura Kornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open on the diplomatic front with a resolution submitted at the United Nations calling for recognition of a Palestinian state. And the European Union voted for Palestinian statehood in principle. Here with more is Eli Wagalanter.
Good evening. A diplomatic tsunami struck Israel yesterday in New York, Strasbourg, and Luxembourg as the United Nations and the European Union advanced diplomatic initiatives deemed harmful by the government. We'll start in New York. 2 years after the Palestinian status was upgraded at the United Nations to a non-member state in the General Assembly, a Palestinian-drafted Jordanian resolution was formally submitted last night to the 15-member Security Council, calling for Israel to withdraw from the territories by the end of 2017. It is unclear when the Security Council will vote on it, as diplomats say negotiations on the text could take some time. 9 votes are needed to adopt the resolution, which would then force the United States to decide whether to veto it. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said on Tuesday that the United States had made no determinations about language, approaches, specific resolutions, any of that. A Palestinian professor at Birzeit University said submitting the resolution was only a first step.
It's not the end of the story as far as the Palestinians are concerned. One has to keep in mind that going to the Security Council has been, from a Palestinian point of view, given their plan only as a first step. The next step would be, after that, no matter what happens in the Security Council, is to apply for membership of various councils, committees of the United Nations. And these will also not be welcomed by Israel. In fact, Israel most likely would take some steps as a form of punishment for the Palestinian Authority.
And indeed, Minister of Strategic Affairs Yuval Steinitz called for Israel to weigh a harsh response to punish the Palestinians for their unilateral steps.
This Palestinian move is an hostile, extremely unfriendly step against Israel. It's not a step toward peace, it's a step toward war. If you take hostile unilateral steps, this is the worst way to promote peace. First, we are explaining to our friends around the world that this is totally unacceptable, and we hope that they will vote against it in the UN. And of course, we expect an American veto to such an hostile, one-sided, unilateral, hostile proposal, anti-Israeli proposal. Secondly, it's my view that we have to take also some countermeasures against the Palestinian Authority.
Meanwhile, in Europe yesterday, Israel suffered back-to-back diplomatic setbacks. In Strasbourg, the European Parliament adopted a resolution to support Palestinian statehood in principle. The motion carried by 498 votes to 88. The compromise resolution did not go as far as some European national legislatures in backing immediate recognition of a Palestinian state, but demonstrated growing impatience with Israel and the stalled peace process. In Luxembourg, European officials were downplaying yesterday's ruling that Hamas should be removed from the European Union's terrorist list, saying the decision to include it was based on press and internet reports and not on acts examined and confirmed in decisions by competent authorities, and should not be seen as a political decision by the 28-member bloc.
We've taken note of this judgment, and we, of course, respect the judgment of the court. But this legal ruling is clearly based on procedural grounds. It does not imply any assessment by the court of the substantive reasons for the designation of Hamas. It is a legal ruling of the court, not a political decision taken by the EU governments.
Hamas nevertheless hailed the decision, while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed outrage, calling on Europe to maintain the ban.
We witnessed staggering examples of European hypocrisy. In Geneva, they call for the investigation of Israel for war crimes, while in Luxembourg, the European Court removed Hamas from the list of terrorist organizations. Hamas that has committed countless war crimes and countless terror acts. It seems that too many in Europe, on whose soil 6 million Jews were slaughtered, have learned nothing. But we in Israel, we've learned. We'll continue to defend our people and our state against the forces of terror and tyranny.
A spokesman for the Foreign Ministry said Israel was hopeful that Hamas would be put back on the list.
Hamas remains designated a terrorist organization, and in the meantime I think that the Europeans have been given 3 months by their own court to correct the procedural error which was identified. We believe that the Europeans agree with us and many other players in the international community that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It is the Europeans who put Hamas on the terror list in the first place, and we're hopeful that in the coming 3 months they will address and correct the procedural error.
With the expectation that Hamas will soon return to its terrorist status, the bloc's second highest tribunal said member states could maintain their freeze on Hamas assets for 3 months to give time for further review or for an appeal to be launched. Laura?
Thank you, Eli. In the streets of the West Bank town of Efrat, there was mostly antagonism for the unilateral Palestinian move for UN recognition of statehood.
We can't give up land or security in the face of their antagonism and their support for terrorism. I don't understand why the Europeans don't understand this. Every step that the Europeans take in support of the Palestinians' efforts brings terrorism closer to their own borders.
It seems like they're going too far, and that the real work needs to be done here on the surface between me and my neighbors in the village next, right next to us, rather than going all the way to the United Nations to get recognition for that. At the end of the day, won't really mean anything here.
They have all the right in the world to ask for whatever they want. I think the timing is despicable. They continue to attack and hurt everything that stands for anything Western, whether it be Israeli, Jewish, American, Canadian, European, anything that the Western world stands for, they hurt. And I think it's not the time. And if the UN sees it as something legitimate, then obviously we know who we're dealing with in the UN.
In another international jab at Israel, 126 countries that are signatories of the Geneva Convention met in the Swiss city to examine the question of the protection of Palestinian civilians in areas controlled by Israel. They signed a 10-point declaration reaffirming the obligation of both Israelis and Palestinians under the international human law. The document does not create new obligations, but it emphasizes the signatories' deep concern about the impact of what they describe as the continued occupation of Palestinian territory and the closure of the Gaza Strip.
This declaration is unprecedented with regard to the detail in which it spells out unlawful conduct, and also it is unprecedented with regard to the number of states endorsing the declaration. Again, 126. This declaration is a signal which is being sent to conflicting parties, and especially to the civilian populations, that there is a law, international, which is protecting their interests, and the parties have chosen to reiterate what is applicable in this particular conflict.
In political notes, Likud MK Moshe Feiglin has decided to drop his perennial candidacy for party leadership. Feiglin said that he made his decision because the Likud court ruled that the party must elect its candidate for prime minister and the rest of the Knesset list on the same day, December 31st. Feiglin would run for a spot on the Likud Knesset list and wanted to concentrate his efforts on that. Danny Danon remains as the only candidate challenging the leadership of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid has gained a new face from the south to join his Yesh Atid list. The head of the Eshkol Regional Council, Chaim Yalin, is set to enter national politics after becoming a well-known figure during Operation Protective Edge. The head of the Government Committee on Socioeconomic Problems, Professor Manuel Trachtenberg, has decided to throw his hat into the ring as a Knesset candidate on the Labor Hatnuah list for Knesset. The economics professor became a household name when his committee was formed following the social tent protest of 2011. Trachtenberg also considers himself to be a viable choice for Minister of Finance. In election-related news, the police last night raided the offices of the right-wing Otzma Yehudi party. The search came in the aftermath of raids on the offices of the anti-assimilation Lahava organization following the arson attack on the hand-in-hand dual-language school in Jerusalem. Police believe that Lahava and Otzma activists work very closely together. Turning to the Iranian nuclear negotiations, and at the end of all-day talks in Geneva, Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that the negotiations will continue next month. Both the U.S. and EU teams did not comment on the discussions, but Araghchi sounded optimistic.
Had a very intense negotiation. It was very useful and helpful. We had both bilateral discussions as well as plenary with all members of the group.
Hamas has patched up ties with Iran after the relationship had been frayed for a long time because they support different sides in the Syrian civil war. Iran stands by the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and Hamas calls for his ouster. According to Deputy Hamas leader Moussa Abu Marzouk, relations were restored last week when a delegation from Gaza visited Tehran. Regarding the security situation, Marzouk said that Hamas remains committed to the truce as long as Israel abides by it. Earlier this week, a spokesman for Hamas's armed wing said there could be a new explosion unless Israel allows for reconstruction of homes destroyed during the summer war to be speeded up. Now to a major breakthrough in U.S.-Cuba relations. Alexandra Jen has more on this. Alexandra?
Well, Laura, after 50 years of severed ties between the two countries, President Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro have come to an agreement.
And the students and a parent from hand
President
in hand.
Obama has announced the United States and Cuba will work towards the restoration of diplomatic relations. This comes hours after the return of Alan Gross, an American Jew who was imprisoned in Cuba for 5 years. Gross, a USAID worker, and an unnamed American CIA agent were released in exchange for the return of 3 Cuban intelligence agents, marking a landmark shift between the two countries.
We hope in the normalization process, which we will engage in now, that further progress will be made, and we also hope that over the course of the next months and years, the people of Cuba are going to change Cuba. And that's what I think will happen here.
Beginning after the Cuban Revolution in 1959, the U.S. implemented policies that have prevented trade and transportation between the two countries and maintained embargo. Under Fidel Castro's rule, U.S.-Cuba relations deteriorated as the U.S. feared for Castro's set of reforms. And now, 5 decades later, President Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro, Fidel Castro's brother, have agreed to send U.S. officials to visit Cuba and to establish an embassy in Havana. But Republican senators, led by Cuban-American Senator Marco Rubio, claim that President Obama was unable to negotiate reasonable terms, giving Cuba everything they asked for and receiving no assurances toward advancing democracy.
These changes will lead to legitimacy for a government that shamelessly, continuously abuses human rights, but it will not lead to assistance for those whose rights are being abused.
But there was bipartisan support for Gross's release. Gross was imprisoned in 2009 for illegally importing satellite equipment to Cuba. Upon his arrival from Havana, Gross was greeted by Secretary of State John Kerry at Air Force Base Andrews. Shortly after, appearing relieved and frail, Gross spoke to the media and wished everyone a happy holiday as he returned home on the first day of Hanukkah.
Today is the first day of Hanukkah, and I guess so far it's the best Hanukkah that I'll be celebrating for a long time.
Gross thanked President Obama for helping with his return to the country and spoke of the strained U.S.-Cuba relations.
5.5 decades of history show us that such belligerence inhibits better judgment. 2 wrongs never make a right. I truly hope that we can now get beyond these mutually belligerent policies.
On the plane ride home, Gross spoke with President Obama, thanking him for his help, and then he called his 2 daughters, one in Oregon and one in Tel Aviv, to tell them Dad is now free. Laura.
Thank you so much for that report, Alexandra. At the White House Hanukkah candlelighting ceremony, Obama linked the holiday to his historical policy changes on Cuba he made earlier in the day, which led to the freeing of Alan Gross. The special menorah used at the ceremony was commissioned by the White House from the hand-in-hand bilingual school in Jerusalem, where Arab and Jewish students learn together, and which was the target of a recent arson attack. 2 students from the school flew in with their parents to light the menorah, whose 8 branches each represent the values on which the school was founded.
Bayamim begin with today's wonderful news. I'm told that in the Jewish tradition, one of the great mitzvahs is Pidyon Shivuim. You know, my Hebrew is not perfect, but I get points for trying. But it describes the redemption, the freeing of captives. And that's what we're celebrating today, because after being unjustly held in Cuba for more than 5 years, American Alan Gross is free. And I can't think of a better way to mark this holiday with its message that freedom is possible than with the historic changes that I announced today in our Cuba policy, which are these are changes that are rooted in America's commitment to freedom and democracy for all the Cuban people, including its small but proud Jewish community. And Alan's remarks about the need for these changes was extremely powerful. The light of hope must outlast the fires of hate. That's what the Hanukkah story teaches us. That's what our young people can teach us, that one act of faith can make a miracle, that love is stronger than hate, that peace can triumph over conflict. And during this Festival of Lights, let's commit ourselves to making some small miracles ourselves and then sharing them with the world.
In the wake of the National Insurance Institute's report on poverty, more than 20 mayors and local city council leaders met in Tel Aviv to encourage the national government to deal more seriously with the issue of food shortages. They set up a program called the National Project for Food Security. Both the Joint and Kolel Chabad helped develop the project, and Rabbi Menachem Trexler joins me now in the studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Good evening. Happy Hanukkah.
I understand that the goal of the project is to promote a situation where poverty-stricken families are provided with food and are also given the tools to escape the cycle of poverty and an end to their reliance on government and NGO handouts. Does that work, and how is it working?
So we're right now running a pilot project in 20 municipalities throughout Israel. And the concept is to identify who needs the help and how to provide it. So there are three general categories: a chronic family, which is always in poverty, or someone which is ill, temporarily lost a job, or a third that they're on the way out of poverty. And we have to identify those families and give them the tools so they could get out. Number one, give them the food, because they've got to eat healthy food, but at the same time provide them with courses in each category with their own specific type, how to get out of the cycle, to give them the tools they need. What type of food to buy when you got 100 shekel, where to use it, how to get the most for your money, etc.
Do you discuss that with a dietitian, what kind of food they're getting,
Sure.
What's the most important food
There's
they're
a
getting?
dietitian, there's a financial advisor on the team, and they set up a project for these families.
Rabbi, how many families are being reached by your project?
There's currently about 3,000 families in the project. It's growing every single day. Each municipality has a social worker dedicated specifically to food security, and they guide them to get into the project.
Where are the biggest problems in Haredi areas and Arab areas, the elderly children? Where do you find the most problematic?
We work with the municipalities, with the Misrad Revacha, so it's all across the board. There's no one specific. Anybody that is in contact with the Misrad Revacha, there are Arab families, Jewish families, of course, and Haredi, non-Haredi. There's no. Poverty hits everybody. You can never know.
How do you have a reach out? Do you have a program? Do you have some sort of connection to the ministry, the welfare ministry?
Well, yesterday we had a conference with the 20 cities and the mayors that are part of the project. The director of Misrad Revacha, Mr. Yossi Silman, was there and is very proud of the project and its success, and they're hoping to roll it out to the entire country as soon as the pilot project finishes.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Please do us the honor of lighting our Hanukkah candles this evening.
Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kidishanu mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner Chanukah.
Amen.
Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim lavoseinu bayamim hahem v'zman hazeh.
Amen. Rabbi, thank you so much for coming in, and we wish you the best of luck with your wonderful project.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah to you as well. Taking a look at local finance, and the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up on the last day of the trading week. Here's a look at the late afternoon numbers. The IBA weather team says temperatures will drop slightly tomorrow. Here's the forecast at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. And that's all for this evening. Aaron Viner will be here tomorrow with all the latest news from Israel and abroad. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield wishing you a happy Hanukkah and shalom from Jerusalem.